E85 cold start. Hello everyone, I'm Joel. In this video I'm going to be disclosing to you guys how much it costs to make 644 horsepower with my M50 in my E30. Before anything I have to give the disclaimer, 650 horsepower is way too much power. This is not necessary at all, and it is a great responsibility to wield a machine with this much power. You need to have a lot of discipline and a lot of self-control to not get yourself into some sticky situations, because it's very easy to be in third or fourth gear, give it throttle for 1 second, 2 seconds too long, and that could be the difference between life or death. This is not a game. This is very serious, having a car of this power, and I need you guys to know that I understand that, and this is a great responsibility owning a car with this much power on the street, because your life and everyone else's life around you is dependent on you being able to control your machinery. So if you don't feel like you can control it, don't get it. Honestly, if you really wanted this power, I think it's best to have it on a switch. I'm thinking about putting it on a little dial. Anytime I'm on the highway and want to make use of that power, I'll turn it up to this, but I don't know if it's a good idea to leave it at this full time, because it's just so absolutely unnecessary. This car previously made 515 horsepower, completely stock bottom end, but now I have CP pistons and Eagle rods. Those are the two supporting mods that I have to support this amount of power. In the head, it has S52 cams, and that's basically it. The M50 normally has an 84mm bore, but the CP pistons that are in it are 86.5mm bore, because the biggest thing about this car is I paid $300 on Facebook Marketplace for the M50 short block with the CP pistons, Eagle rods, and M52 B28 crank. $300! I was already rebuilding this engine when this deal came up, and My engine was an M52, so with that I ended up having to get a Euro Z3 crank sensor, which moved the crank sensor from the back of the engine to the front over here, because OBD1 and OBD2 crank sensors are different. One's a Hall effect sensor and the other one is, I'm not sure, but for that sensor to work with the ECU, you need it to be the same type of sensor. Euro Z3 crank sensor is the driving piece of how this was possible. If I couldn't get that crank sensor, I wouldn't have been able to run this engine setup. The next big thing that makes 640 horsepower possible, injector dynamics injectors. These are pretty pricey at $700, but in my opinion, these are worth every penny. I used to have 60-pound Siemens Deca injectors and they were trash. The car would always stall, it would idle horribly, it wouldn't catch itself after coming out of gear and going into neutral. It was just running really poorly. And since this company provides the dead times table for the amount of fuel pressure that you're using, injector dead times is the amount of time it takes from when the ECU gives the signal to when the injectors actually open and close. Because there's a slow ramp in with how much fuel is getting into the engine, and then a ramp off after the signal is told to close. So with the correct dead times, it allows the engine to know exactly how much fuel was going into each cylinder. If you don't have the dead times for your injectors, it will run, but it runs a lot better when you know exactly what value that is. You put those values into the computer and it gives you an engine that knows exactly how much fuel is going into the cylinder. Those injectors are what makes the car be able to start up like nothing, drive it down the street to get some groceries, come back, you know, get in it and drive it is mainly down to the injectors and a good tune. So the engine that I purchased off Facebook Marketplace had 200 race hours on the long block, and that's why the guy was like, it needs new rings and bearings to get run again. I was already in that stage, but I was gonna do that with the stock pistons and rods. So I put my bearings that was gonna go into the engine into this one, and then I called CP up and got new piston rings for $250. At the machine shop, I had them hone the block and deck the head. Honing the block was $160, decking the head was $125. The flex fuel sensor was $77 because I can just put 93 in, the ECU automatically adjusts, so I don't have to do anything, and I can rip on it the moment I leave the gas station. Or I put E85 in it and it's making 25 PSI. And then this right here, in my opinion, is the biggest reason why I'm able to get in this car, drive it around like it's nothing, even though it makes so much power. I previously blew my engine up because I was doing a day of delivering food and I ran the tank kind of low and I did a pull while the tank was low on fuel, and then the fuel pump took in air and blew my engine up. So this right here has a Walbro 450 inside of it, which was $175, with a fuel pump relay that is triggering it, which was $21. This surge tank was $532. This fuel filter was $250. It's a 10 micron stainless steel fuel filter that works with E85. All the 8AN hoses with the fittings and all that was $413. That is a very pricey piece of it, but you want nice fittings because this is running fuel. This is PTFE braided line, so I want to make sure that I have no issues with my fuel, so I made sure to get good quality parts for all of this. Inside of the stock gas tank is a Dietzwerks 300 fuel pump, but I do want to switch that to a low pressure fuel pump because right now, since it's a high pressure fuel pump, it's basically sucking all the fuel out of the cavity where the fuel pump is in. But if it's a low pressure pump, it's not going to be pulling as much fuel. So there's going to generally be more fuel around the fuel pump, which is what you want. But the corrugated hose makes sure that there's no fuel pressure loss from the fuel pump to the fuel pump hanger, because that tends to be where fuel lines get eaten up and corroded, where the fuel hoses lose their strength being submerged inside of the fuel, and then they start leaking without you even knowing, and then you lose fuel pressure because of that. We don't want any of that. A corrugated fuel hose inside of the stock tank is the way to go. The fuel hose in the trunk goes into these bulkhead fittings and it converts it to just a regular fuel hose. But that is E85 safe fuel hose. It's Gates Barricade fuel hose, and that was $70. That fuel hose is kind of sketchy though, because it didn't really sit fully on my barb fittings and I had to tighten the clamps really tight onto them. And I have had the fuel hoses leak because the hose clamps came loose. So if you do run that, make sure you keep a close eye on your fuel hoses. Lastly, everything else for the engine gaskets was $400, like the rear front main seals, front timing cover seals, rear main gasket seals, new main bearings, new connecting rod bearings, valve stem seals, exhaust manifold gaskets, intake manifold gaskets, throttle body gaskets. All this stuff to refurnish the engine was $400. I forgot to mention the clutch and head gasket setup. The clutch I've had for 3 years. It's a DKM twin disc. I've been reusing it since I got it. I paid around $1,000 and I love that clutch. It feels so good daily driving it on the street, and it's super soft and it's nowhere near as heavy as my E46 stage 3 6-puck clutch. The head gasket is a copper spacer with a cut ring head gasket. I ended up having the copper spacer because the pistons are NA compression. Since this was an NA race car engine, I chose to use the copper spacer because I wanted to lower the compression down a little bit so it'd be safer on pump gas. It probably would have been fine, but I just wanted it to be safe. The copper spacer and the cut rings are reusable, but the actual cork head gasket material, I paid $290 to replace that. All in all, the total to make 644 horsepower in my M50, reliably is the keyword with nice parts, was $3,601. That's pretty good. The surge tank, which is such a big factor. You don't need the surge tank. If you're gonna keep the gas tank above half at all times, you don't need that, but I got a really good deal, and that's why I built this engine. If it wasn't for that good deal, I would have still had stock components because, like I said, this is so unnecessary in this chassis. It's just one of the things, it was a good deal, so I got it. But because it was a good deal, I ended up spending way more money on top of it, but that's just the way things go. You get one good deal and it makes you spend $5 grand on top of it. But and if you haven't seen the video of how much it costs to turbo my M52, I made a video about that a few years ago. Go check that out. But I'm gonna go do some driving now. This is just gonna be a quick video to show you guys that not everything that I do is very over the top expensive. You can find good deals on Facebook. You gotta be on Facebook though. That's like the only place that I find good deals on. And that's what makes most of this car stuff possible. Getting good deals everywhere you can so that it becomes a lot more realistic. I'm finally back from my 11-day trip to the Dominican Republic. I had a great time. And then when we got back, my whole family had a fever, so I'm finally over it. And in the next video, I'm gonna be doing a huge makeover on the E30. Finally, I'm gonna be getting a cow catcher, painting it, fixing this fender. I bought the car with this Bondo crunch up here, and then I inflicted further damage when I lost the rear shock bolt and then pulling in my driveway. Caught on the fender. And then I'm gonna paint match the mirrors so that they're nice and shiny instead of this dull, ugly plastic. And then the last thing is I'm gonna be installing these Ford Taurus side skirts. And I'm gonna be paint matching everything, making it all look good, and finally giving this car the refresh that it's needed. And finally, I'm making the step up away from spray cans. I've never used a spray gun before, so I'm gonna be learning with you guys. And I think that's gonna be a really fun challenge. And it's gonna be very valuable to be proficient with a spray gun. So you already know, if I'm gonna be learning on the E30, I'm not stopping until it's perfect. So stay tuned. I hope you guys enjoyed. And yeah, see you next time.